Greetings all, it is January 31st, 2023. Entertain this simple thought experiment. There are two people. One is a buyer and one is a seller. The seller misrepresents their goods. It could be services or anything, but let's use goods for this example. The buyer, giving the benefit of doubt to the seller, proceeds with the transaction. And it may be some time before they become aware that the goods were misrepresented or flawed. In other words, they got ripped off. Which one is karmically responsible for that transaction? You could argue that the buyer should have done more due diligence or not have been as trusting. But the buyer was acting in good faith, and the seller was not, because the seller knew that what they were doing was wrong, and that it would cause harm, to whatever degree, to the buyer. Therefore, in this scenario, it is pretty clear that there is a karmic obligation on the part of the seller who misrepresented their goods. Now, there may be a case where the seller is unaware that the goods are flawed, and so they represented the goods to the best of their knowledge. But if that was the case, and the buyer complained, the seller would have an opportunity to make good on the transaction and either refund the proceeds or allow the buyer to return the goods, and the karma would be balanced. In the case where the seller deliberately misrepresented the goods and knew that they were flawed, clearly the karmic obligation is on the part of the seller. And to some degree, in this scenario, the buyer is a victim. Why am I presenting this scenario? What possible value could this have? Well, I've been thinking a lot about what's going on in the world and why certain things irk me so much. Like, what is the root of it? We often concentrate on the large numbers of people who are misinformed about all manner of subjects. Could be politics, could be the pandemic, could be the economy, could be anything. This is a huge problem. And often we are aggravated by these people because they are not reflecting reality accurately. In fact, rather, I think we really need to focus our attention on the sellers or the purveyors of the misinformation and disinformation, the much smaller group of people who are responsible for deluding masses of people. They have a very significant karmic obligation because they know that what they are doing is wrong. Even if they firmly believe in their cause, they are using underhanded and unethical means of achieving their ends. And this is one of the things that I think significantly differs between the right and the left of the political spectrum. Personally, using myself as an example, I always make efforts to try and make sure that the information I am conveying is accurate. And were I, by mistake or omission, to promote something that I later found was inaccurate, I would make efforts to correct that. Whereas there are many people on the right who will promote information which they know is inaccurate, or they engage in no due diligence to ensure that that information is accurate, and they promote it anyway. Clearly, this is unethical, and clearly they have a karmic obligation commensurate with whatever harm they may have caused to others or society. As I have explained before, our karma includes whatever harm we indirectly cause through our actions. So it's not just the person, for example, who is misinformed. It is whatever spin-off effects result from that. So if one person is deliberately misinformed and they misinform 10 other people, the originator of that knowledge or information is to some extent karmically responsible for all of those effects. There may be cases where people on the left mislead people unintentionally and don't rectify it, or even cases where they do so deliberately and consciously. But from my perspective, that is a relatively rare phenomenon, whereas on the right side of the political spectrum, it is extremely common. I can think of the most popular cable network in America as a glaring example. And there are many other right-wing media outlets that engage in misinformation or disinformation on a daily basis. In fact, I remember reading about people who engaged in these kinds of activities professionally, who kind of gave up their efforts to profit from misinformation on the left because it wasn't very successful, whereas on the right, it was low-hanging fruit. I know from my own experience, having dealt with progressive activists and climate activists, that if you put something forward that is inaccurate, people will jump on you hard and very fast. I have personally been involved in debates that raged for days with hundreds of comments about what other people would consider minutia. That's just common practice. You have to be very careful that what you're saying is accurate, or people will challenge you. And I respect that. It's holding very high standards. It's good. So that is why I shared the thought experiment of buyer and seller scenario to simplify this situation so that we can see very clearly who and what are karmically responsible for those kinds of actions. Now, I'm engaging in this exercise because I want to clarify these complex situations so that people can know where they stand personally with respect to these sometimes complicated ethical and moral questions. Take, for example, the former president of the United States, who has been documented to have told many thousands of lies while in office. Fact checked. I recall once actually that when I was involved in promoting climate change information, there was an author who was writing a lot of climate disinformation and getting it published all over the place. And there was a well-known scientist at the time who took one of his articles and went through it line by line and annotated it and detailed all of the inaccuracies in his assertions and then published it. It was many years ago, so don't ask me for the source. And the author continued what he was doing without even blinking an eye. So even though a tremendous amount of time and effort went into debunking what he was writing, and I presume he knew about it because it was a fairly high-profile publication, it did not alter his behavior one iota. That's a lot of bad karma. Another example that kept coming to my mind when I was working on this, a number of years ago, I was doing some drywalling, and I had to refresh my memory about something. So I, of course, Googled it, and I came across a video. And in this video on YouTube, a couple amateurs were showing how they did it, which was completely wrong. I mean, it was horrible. But this video had a lot of views. And I commented on it. I'm like, this is completely wrong. You're totally misleading people. It's not even close. And of course, they completely ignored my comment, probably because they didn't want to take down the video because it had a lot of views. And I thought, oh my God, how many people have watched this and then completely screwed up their drywalling, handyman efforts because of these people and their misinformation? And how many hours were wasted because of this ineptitude. And I'm sure they had been informed by then that what they were demonstrating was completely erroneous, but they just didn't care. That has always stuck in my mind, as silly as it sounds. For a number of years, many people have been referring to this period as the age of stupid. It may also be accurate to refer to it as the age of mass deception. That may have something to do with the transit of Neptune through Pisces, but that's another story. I thought I'd share that with you. It's another one of those things on my list of things to do. Thanks for all your likes, shares, and comments. Take care and have a good day.